Imagine standing in front of your team facing a critical moment that could alter your team's entire future. What if the difference between success and failure hinged on your ability to tell a story? In today's episode, we're going to dive deep into the art of storytelling within leadership. I'll share how a well-told story can inspire, it can motivate, and lead your team to greatness. Stay tuned as we uncover the secrets of crafting narratives that resonate and drive real impact. Once again, I am Steve Baumgartner, your host, and my mission here today and every day is to serve you through providing knowledge, tools, and resources to help you become a better leader in three primary battlefronts. Those battlefronts simply are out in the workplace, out in your community, and most importantly, yourself and your family. Now let's get to work.
Leaders are not born in a womb. They are forged through heat, pressure, and a whole lot of sweat. The Fire Forged Leader podcast serves the audience through exploring leadership at work, in the community, and with the family, using a practical perspective and real-life experiences from the host, Steve Baumgartner, and his guests in The Forge. Now, it's time to enter the Forge with the Fire Forged Leader.
Recently, I've talked to some people who are focused on storytelling. I've talked to people like Andrea Sampson. And next week, you'll be hearing from the great Scott Mann. I've also had on some great storytellers like Drew Dudley and many of my other guests. I've always been drawn to a good story. Further, I am that guy that gravitates into telling my stories to people, probably too much at times. And I found over time that rather than being ashamed of my past, that when I'm generous with my scars, as Scott Mann coins, I connect with people on a deeper level and inspire them to take a journey with me. Stories help us do this simply by inspiring and motivating others. But we also help them to understand complex issues by putting them into a realm that they can relate. Stories also build trust and credibility. They bridge cultural divides. They actually build personal influence. And amazingly, they build listener retention. So let's talk about some of the stories that I've told on here. I've talked about my pre-adoption stories of my own abuse. After adoption, how I grew up in a broken emotional state, even though I had wonderful parents who adopted me. My drug abuse and my addiction to power, the power over people, how I like to manufacture and deal, the abuse that I put my children and my wife through while I was dealing with my demons throughout the years, my arrests, my redemption, my weight loss and fitness journeys, the journey that I've taken with my faith, the journey that I've taken with my children and with my wife, where I'm at now, and the stories of those successes. All of those stories are context to help the listeners connect with me in a deep way. Through this connection, though, it allows the listener to put themselves into my story. It gives the listener hope. And ultimately, what those stories sell is hope. They sell the idea that a person can always change and take control of their lives and harness their leadership potential. Now, I also want to give you a little bit of backup of what I've been telling you all this time. So first off, Steve Jobs, we all know him, right? Steve Jobs says, the most powerful person in the world is the storyteller. The storyteller sets the vision, values, and agenda of an entire generation that is to come. But now I'm going to follow that up. That was a great quote, but I'm going to follow that up with some facts. So, Gallup, they do wonderful polls. Gallup states leaders who use storytelling as a communication tool are 22 times more likely to be remembered by the audience compared to those who only use facts and figures. Stanford also states that a study found that stories are 63% more memorable than statistics alone. Harvard Business Review states leaders who communicate through stories can increase employee engagement by up to 30%. Corporate Executive Board states that 85% of leaders who are seen as effective communicators use storytelling techniques to convey their messages. Furthermore, Forbes states that 92% of consumers want brands to make ads that feel like a story. So let's talk a little bit about how we craft a good story. And this works in all areas of all three battlefields, right? It works in the workplace, it works out in the community, and it works at home. So let's talk about those elements. First, purpose and vision. It always comes down to purpose and vision, people. We need to clearly define the purpose of the story, right? Just telling a story doesn't do anybody good. What should they take from the story? What is the message or lesson that you're trying to convey? Align it with your vision and goals. We also need to pull out relatable characters. A lot of times when people tell stories, they only talk about themselves. But not everybody out in the audience, not everybody sitting at that boardroom table, not everybody in your family is going to relate to you wholly. They also need some other characters in the story. So, who else was on the team? Who helped you? Who hurt you? Whoever needs to be in that story needs to be in that story. Whoever was in the original story needs to be in the story that had an integral part of the story. You can also use inspirational figures that might have given someone hope at the time. This one's important. Conflict and challenges, all right? You'll hear me say it time and time again. Everybody likes the underdog. They root for the underdog. Every movie, every story, you hear people root for the underdog. And if they don't, they're sick, right? Let's just all be honest. They're sick if they're not rooting for the underdog. So you need to highlight the obstacles or the challenges faced. And what it does is it creates tension and keeps the audience engaged. Then finally, we need to tell the audience the resolution and the successes or the failures. But we need to show how those characters overcame the challenges. Take a look at any movie that you watch, right? Lord of the Rings, Harry Potter, since we're in this whole magical realm. People band together. It's in children's movies, right? It's in Super Pets. It's in whatever. I don't know my movies, guys. But the characters come up against resistance. They come up against conflict. But then they also need resolution and success. Show how the characters in the story, how you and previous teams, or if you're telling a story about another team, how they overcame those challenges. This is the part that really inspires and motivates the audience, right? They're like, oh man, I don't know how they would have done that. I don't get it, right? And then you show them how they did it. And that builds motivation up. And it inspires your audience to do better because it ultimately demonstrates resilience and success. And then you got to end. You got to end it, right? We talked about vision and mission, or vision and purpose, excuse me. We got to bring it back to that. We got to end it with a clear call to action so that we encourage the audience to apply what was in this story to their own life's work. So let's talk about that a little bit, right? Purpose and vision. Let's say at work, right, that you have to tighten up the ship, that you have some cost control measures that you need to implement to stay competitive, right? And what you're going to do is you're not going to fill roles that are currently empty. All right, so when we start out with a purpose and vision, we have to be honest with our people. Hey guys, currently we don't have these two positions, right? My plan is not to fill them. The reason for that is because we need to stay competitive, and your guys's employment here matters. I want to be able to make sure that we stay around, that we, continue to produce products that continue to sell, whatever the case is, right? But I also want to tell you a story, all right? I want to tell you a story of when I went through this once before. And I did this at my last job. So in my last job, I had an operations manager, right? And I had this team around me. And, we were pretty thin already. And I get it. Totally understand. There was all sorts of reasons, right? My operations manager sitting over here going, you know what? My people are stressed every day right now producing their products, right? They're stretched thin already. I don't know how we're going to do it, boss. I understand we want to be competitive, but how do we do that? And, I had, one of his superintendents or supervisors sitting over here in the corner, and, they're asking me these same questions. So I had this team around me who didn't believe that we could pull this off. They understood why we needed to pull it off, but they didn't know how we were going to get there, right? So we made it a point. We made it a point to go out. We made it a point to go out and talk to every one of those employees every couple hours, every day. It was a set meeting time. And we went out there and we talked to them. And we just asked them simple questions like, hey, we tell them, hey, understand, we know you're stretched a little bit thin, but what can we do to help you, right? How can we help? And a lot of times, you just talk to the employees, and what happens is they go, you know what? We could probably get more throughput if you gave me a screwdriver to tighten this thing over here that loosens up every 3 hours. That way I don't have to call for maintenance and wait for maintenance to get here to do something that I obviously could do myself. And we kept on attacking these little things. And at first we weren't hitting our rate. But over 3 weeks, we continued to grow little bit by little bit by little bit, and we hit our rate. And it was like those people never existed that we didn't backfill. So then, I would probably ask him at this point, right? Should we model that same thing here? What's your guys' thoughts around that? At this past practice at work, but that's not here. I get that. But do you think that the same approach might work? Do you think that our people could give us ways to be more efficient to where not backfilling these positions can help us remain profitable? And then once that we got through with that conversation, it would turn into that call to action. We would make sure that we followed through and did it. So that was a totally fabricated story, right? And you could probably hear that in my voice. It's amazing, when someone tells an unauthentic story, how easy it is to pick out. This week, I had someone tell a story about me that was totally fabricated. They told it on social media. And it got picked apart by people who didn't even know me because it was not authentic at all. But when you truly tell an authentic story, when you talk to the audience and tell them your hurts, your emotions, your joy, your victory, all that kind of stuff, they will see the authenticity shining through. So I ask you these questions today. 1, how could you be a better leader through storytelling? Next, what stories in your past are you hiding because of your ego? Or maybe it's your shame, but you hold them back and don't allow someone else to benefit from your stories. How many of those stories do you have? As we're talking about this, I'm also going to ask you, does your leadership persona lack luster? Does it lack something due to being all data and not being able to tell a story? Now, I'm going to challenge all of you to take a look at this model of storytelling. I want you to practice it. Don't just go out there and think you're an expert, because it takes practice. And see how your stories can benefit your mission. And go out there and tell your stories proudly. Remember, everyone is rooting for the underdog. You don't need to feel that shame. You're on the other side of that. Everyone roots for the underdog. So let's recap this for a minute. We talked about how stories allow us to connect and how they relay a more relatable and retainable message. We talked about how those stories inspire others. I gave you reference to how I use some of my stories. I listed reputable data from sources that state how powerful stories are. And then I wrapped it all up and gave you a simple model of how to tell the stories to get results. Now, I want you to go back and listen to some of the other podcasts on here. Andrea Sampson, she has her model of storytelling, and it's absolutely wonderful. Drew Dudley tells some amazing stories. Go back and listen to some of the military people that I've had on here. Some of the Navy SEALs, some of the Green Berets. They all tell amazing stories. But I also want you to tune in next week. And I want you to listen to the episode dropping on YouTube on July 1st and on all the rest of the audio platforms on July 2nd. The reason being is for Freedom Day, July 4th, I had on one of the most amazing storytellers that has graced the earth in my eyes. And the reason why I say that is he has been given this amazing gift. And also the reason why I'm releasing it for July 4th is this gift of being able to give freedom to so many people, Gold Star families, veterans, disabled veterans, all of these people who are held in this darkness of the mind. He has been given this gift of storytelling to be able to allow them to have freedom again. That man is the amazing retired Lieutenant Colonel Scott Mann. And he's going to be further talking about storytelling. So make sure you tune in. Honor both Scott and myself by listening to that episode. And speaking about honor, thank you for once again honoring me with your presence here on the podcast. You don't know how much it means for you to be here each and every week. So to wrap this all up, leaders, you have come here to listen to this message, but listening is not enough. What kind of stories are you going to tell today, this week, this month, and this year? Remember, when you become a better leader, you become a better spouse, a better parent, a better coworker, and ultimately that person that other people want to follow.
You have just experienced the heat and pressure of the forge. Remember, words without action are meaningless. Now, after the heat of the forge, shape your thoughts, quench your brain, then put your new tools to use, adding to your leadership. Tune in next week for more lessons from the forge.